3:34 a.m. The chime sounded. The automatic doors slid open. A man I'd never seen before stepped into Third Eye Vape, my small 24-hour shop, tucked between a laundromat and an old Lucky Spot gas station. Working the overnight shift usually meant painfully quiet hours. The constant hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of fruit-flavored vape juice, and mostly just me watching security cameras. But this man, he was different. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall, thin. His gray jacket hung loosely. His old leather boots were cracked from years of wear. His hair, neatly combed, looked slightly damp. What struck me most was his stillness. Most people look around a store. He didn't. He walked straight to a display near the counter, picked up a single disposable vape, and set it gently on the counter. "I'll take this one." His voice was calm, polite, almost rehearsed. I scanned it. He paid with exact cash. Not a penny more, not a penny less. He nodded once, turned, and walked back out into the darkness. The entire interaction lasted less than a minute. As the automatic doors closed, I looked at the clock. 3:38 a.m., 4 minutes, exactly. The next night, he came back. Same time, same vape, same cash, same quiet nod. Again, gone by 3:38. By the end of that first week, I found myself checking the clock, almost without realizing it. 3:33, I'd straighten the counter. 3:34, I'd glance toward the front doors, and almost every single night, right on time, the chime would ring. One evening, my coworker Jake arrived early. Just as the man walked in, I leaned over. "You know that guy?" Jake looked toward the entrance, then frowned. "What guy?" I laughed. "The guy buying the vape." Jake replied, "There isn't anybody standing there." I looked back. The man was exactly where he'd been, patiently waiting. Jake had already turned away, unlocking the office door. I told myself he must have looked away at the wrong moment. It was the only explanation that made sense. The customer picked up his receipt, nodded politely, and disappeared into the night. As I locked the register, I noticed the time again, 3:38 a.m., exactly, again. It wasn't until I climbed into my truck that I realized something. For 7 straight nights, I couldn't remember seeing him blink, not once. People don't realize how much you can learn about someone without ever having a real conversation. By the second week, I could have completed his transaction with my eyes closed. Every morning at exactly 3:34 a.m., the bell chimed. He walked in, picked up the same disposable vape, paid with exact cash, nodded once, then walked back out. Always gone by 3:38. It became so predictable that I'd start getting his purchase ready before he even reached the register. One morning, I decided to test something. Just before he came in, I moved the vape he always bought to a different hook, 1 row lower. The bell chimed. 3:34. He walked in. Without hesitating, he reached to the exact spot where it had always been. His hand stopped in midair. For the first time, he looked confused, not angry, not frustrated, just lost. His eyes slowly scanned the display until they landed on the vape. 1 row lower. He picked it up. He walked to the counter. I almost couldn't find it. It was the longest sentence I'd ever heard him speak. I smiled. Yeah, we rearranged the display. He didn't answer, simply stared at the counter while I rang up the sale. His hands caught my attention. They were rough, calloused, with tiny cuts covering his knuckles. The kind of hands you'd expect from someone who'd spent decades working outdoors. As I handed him his receipt, I noticed something else. Dirt beneath his fingernails. Not fresh dirt. Dark, packed-in dirt, like he'd been digging. He tucked the receipt into his jacket pocket, nodded once, then left, exactly as always. Later that morning, I found myself wondering where someone like him was coming from at 3:30 in the morning. There weren't any neighborhoods within walking distance, no apartments, no hotels, Nothing except the old Lucky Spot gas station next door and a stretch of empty commercial buildings. The thought stayed with me longer than it should have. The following night, I stepped outside at 3:33. I wanted to see where he came from. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no bicycles, no one walking along the road. Nothing. I stood there for nearly a minute. Then, at exactly 3:34, the bell inside the shop chimed. I turned around. He was already standing at the counter, holding the same vape, waiting for me. I never heard the doors open. I never saw him walk in. He simply was there. For the first time since meeting him, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not fear, just a quiet feeling that something wasn't adding up. When he reached into his pocket for the exact cash, something small slipped onto the floor. Neither of us seemed to notice until after he'd walked out. I bent down and picked it up. It was an old brass lighter, heavy, worn smooth with age, engraved with 2 faded initials. JHI set it behind the register, figuring he'd come back for it tomorrow. He never missed a night. Why would this one be any different? I placed the brass lighter beneath the register, right next to the receipt paper. I figured he'd notice it was missing the moment he reached into his jacket pocket. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed everything. The next morning, at 3:33 a.m., I caught myself looking toward the front doors. By now, it had become part of my routine. 3:33, I'd straighten the display. 3:34, the bell would ring. 3:38, he'd be gone. Simple, predictable, comforting even. The clock rolled over. 3:34, nothing, no bell, no automatic doors, no quiet footsteps. I waited. 3:35, still nothing. 3:36, the parking lot remained empty. By 3:38, I realized something strange. For the first time in weeks, I actually missed seeing him. We'd probably exchanged fewer than 50 words altogether. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he lived, didn't even know why he came in every morning. Yet somehow, his absence made the store feel different. Quieter than usual, almost too quiet. I shrugged it off. Maybe he'd gotten sick. Maybe he'd found another shop. People change routines all the time. At least that's what I told myself. The next night, I was ready. The lighter still sat behind the counter. 3:33. I glanced at the clock. 3:34, nothing. 3:35, nothing. 3:38, still nothing. By the third night, I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted toward the entrance. Every time headlights crossed the parking lot, I looked up. Every time the ice machine outside groaned, my heart skipped for just a second. But the bell never rang. Around 4 in the morning, I picked up the lighter for the first time. It was heavier than I expected. Solid brass, the edges worn smooth by decades of use. On one side, the initials were deeply engraved, JH. On the other, there was something I'd missed before, a date, October 14th, 1978. At first, I assumed it was someone's birthday, or maybe an anniversary. Then I flipped it over. A tiny engraving ran along the bottom edge, so small I had to hold it beneath the register light to read it. It said, "Home is where they wait." I stared at those words for several seconds. Something about them gave me chills. Not because they were frightening, because they sounded personal, like they meant something to someone. Just then, the front door chimed. I looked up so quickly I nearly dropped the lighter. A young woman stepped inside, mid-20s, dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She looked exhausted, like she'd been driving for hours. She walked straight to the drink cooler, grabbed a bottle of water, then approached the register. As I rang up her purchase, her eyes drifted toward the brass lighter sitting beside the register. She froze. Her face lost its color. Without taking her eyes off it, she quietly asked, "Where did you get that?" For a moment, neither of us spoke. She just stared at the lighter like she'd seen a ghost. I glanced down at it. "You know whose this is?" She slowly looked up at me. "Where did you get it?" Her voice had changed. The exhaustion was gone. Now she sounded concerned. I shrugged. A regular left it here a few nights ago. She frowned. A regular? Yeah, he comes in almost every morning. What time? I looked at the clock above the register. I didn't even have to think about it. 3:34. The color drained from her face. Every morning. I nodded, like clockwork. She was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked, "Can you describe him?" I smiled. Sure. I began listing everything I'd noticed. Late 60s, tall, gray jacket, old work boots, hair combed straight back, soft-spoken, always polite, always bought the same disposable vape, always paid with exact cash, never stayed longer than 4 minutes. As I spoke, her expression kept changing, not disbelief, recognition. When I finished, she whispered, "That sounds exactly like him." I slid the lighter across the counter. So it's his. She picked it up carefully, running her thumb over the worn engraving. "I've seen this before." She turned it over, read the inscription, closed her eyes, then quietly smiled. "My mom used to tell me he never went anywhere without it." I leaned forward. "So your dad?" She shook her head. "My grandfather." I waited, expecting her to explain. Instead, she slipped the lighter back onto the counter. "I don't think this belongs to the man you've been seeing." I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, like she was choosing her next words very carefully. "My grandfather owned this property long before any of these buildings were here." She pointed out the front windows. "The gas station?" I followed her finger. She nodded. "Before Lucky Spot." I looked confused. There wasn't always a gas station. She smiled faintly. "No, there was a farmhouse." I looked back toward the windows. It was hard to imagine nothing but asphalt, gas pumps, neon signs, traffic. She continued, "My family lived here for generations." I glanced back at the lighter. "So your grandfather used to own this land?" "Yes, and this was his." She nodded, "Unless someone made a perfect copy." The store suddenly felt much quieter, the hum of the refrigerators, the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Even the traffic outside seemed distant. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind. So, if it's his, why hasn't he come back to get it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, tapped through a handful of old family photos. Then she turned the screen toward me. The black and white picture showed a man standing in front of an old farmhouse. He was smiling, wearing a gray work jacket, old leather boots, his hair neatly combed back. In his right hand was the same brass lighter. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Because the man in that photograph looked exactly like the customer who had been walking into my shop every morning at 3:34 a.m. The only difference, the photograph was dated October 1978. I must have looked at that photograph a dozen times. Then I looked through the front windows, then back at the photograph. It didn't make sense. The parking lot outside was lit by bright LED floodlights. Cars occasionally pulled up to the gas pumps next door. The highway hummed in the distance. Yet, according to this picture, none of it had existed. Just an old farmhouse, a dirt driveway, and the man who had been standing in front of my register every morning for the past 2 weeks. I finally handed her phone back. "When was this taken?" She glanced at the picture. "My mom always said it was sometime in October of 1978. "And you're telling me that's your grandfather?" She nodded. "His name was James Harper." I looked down at the lighter. The initials suddenly made sense. JH. So, where is he now? She looked out the window. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. I honestly don't know. My mother never liked talking about him. She'd say he disappeared when she was little. Whenever I asked questions, she'd change the subject. That wasn't the answer I expected. If anything, it created even more questions. Disappeared. She nodded. That's the word she always used. Not died, not buried, not passed away. Disappeared. The distinction stuck with me. She placed the lighter back on the counter. If you don't mind, I'd like you to hold on to it. I look surprised. You don't want it. I do. But if the man you've been seeing really left it here, I think he'll come back. I couldn't explain why, but I agreed. Before leaving, she pulled a small notebook from her purse, tore out a page, and wrote down her name and phone number. Emma Harper. If he comes back, call me. After she left, I locked the front door for my break and walked outside. The early morning air was cool. I stood in the parking lot and looked toward the Lucky Spot gas station, then back at the vape shop, trying to imagine what this place looked like nearly 50 years ago. It was impossible. There wasn't a single clue that a farmhouse had ever stood here, just concrete, asphalt, neon. When I came back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be some record of it. So during the slow part of my shift, I searched online, county property records, historic aerial maps, old newspaper clippings. After nearly half an hour, I found a scanned county plat map from the late 1970s. I zoomed in until the image became blurry. Then, there it was. A tiny square drawn exactly where my register now stood, labeled in faded handwriting, Harper Residence. I leaned back in my chair. The hair on my arms stood up. If the map was accurate, then every night at exactly 3:34 a.m., the old man wasn't walking into a vape shop. He was walking through the front door of the home that used to stand here. I stared at the map for a long time. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Just 6 words. I remembered something my mother said. Another message appeared almost immediately. Don't stay there after 3:34 alone. Emma came back the following evening, not at 3:34, but just after 9. She carried a weathered cardboard box tucked beneath one arm. I found these in my mom's attic, she said. She set the box gently on the counter. Inside were dozens of old photographs, property tax receipts, warranty deeds, letters tied together with faded blue ribbon, and one thick family photo album. Business was slow, so for the next couple of hours, the two of us sat behind the counter, carefully turning page after page. There were photographs of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family cookouts beneath a giant oak tree. Everything looked ordinary. Until we reached the final pages, the photographs stopped. Instead, newspaper clippings had been tucked inside. Most had yellowed with age. Some were torn. Others had headlines missing. One clipping caught my attention immediately. It showed an aerial photograph of the property. There was the farmhouse, the old oak tree, a gravel driveway, even an old wooden mailbox near what was now the entrance to the Lucky Spot gas station. I walked outside with the photograph. Standing in the parking lot, I held it up in front of me, trying to line up the picture with what existed today. The house had stood exactly where Third Eye Vape now sat. The front porch was where our checkout counter was. The old driveway had become the entrance to the gas station. Everything fit, almost perfectly. Back inside, Emma pulled another newspaper clipping from the box. This one had no photograph, just a short article. She handed it to me. The headline read, "Local farmhouse destroyed in early morning fire." The article was frustratingly vague. It mentioned smoke, firefighters, heavy damage, but several paragraphs had been cut away years ago. Whatever happened, someone had literally cut the rest of the story from the newspaper. Emma frowned. My mom did that. Why would she cut it out? I asked. I don't know. She stared at the missing section. Maybe she didn't want to remember. Neither of us spoke for a while. The hum of the refrigerators filled the silence. Finally, I looked up at the clock. 3:32 a.m. Without saying a word, Emma looked at it too. For reasons neither of us could explain, we both decided to wait. 3:33, the shop was empty. 3:34, the familiar chime echoed through the store. Emma turned toward the entrance immediately. The old man stepped inside, exactly as he always had. Gray jacket, old boots, hair combed neatly back. He walked to the display, picked up the same disposable vape. Then, for the first time, he looked directly at Emma. His expression never changed. He simply gave a slow, almost familiar nod. Emma's eyes filled with tears, barely above a whisper. She said, "I know that nod. I've seen it before." She slowly reached into the family photo album, opened it to a faded picture taken on the farmhouse porch. Standing beside a little girl was James Harper, looking directly into the camera, giving the exact same nod. Neither of us moved. Emma stood beside the counter. The old man stood only a few feet away, yet somehow it didn't feel like two strangers sharing the same room. It felt like they had been separated by a lifetime. He set the disposable vape on the counter. I scanned it. The register beeped. He reached into his jacket, placed the exact cash on the counter, then looked at Emma one more time. For just a second, I thought he was going to say something. Instead, he simply nodded again, turned, and walked out the front door. The familiar chime echoed behind him. Neither of us spoke until he disappeared into the darkness. Emma finally whispered, "Follow him." I didn't hesitate. I pushed through the front doors and stepped into the parking lot. Empty. No cars, no footsteps, no one crossing toward the highway. The old man had vanished again. I searched behind the building, checked the side alley, even walked over to the Lucky Spot gas station. Nothing. It was as if he'd dissolved into the night. When I came back inside, Emma was still staring at the clock above the register. It read 3:39 a.m. She turned toward me. Why 3:34? I don't know. There has to be a reason. The question stayed with us the rest of the night. Not who was he, but why that exact minute? The next afternoon, after I woke up, I drove to the public library. The local history room occupied a quiet corner on the second floor. Shelves filled with county records, old maps, bound newspapers, microfilm machines that looked older than I was. A librarian helped me find newspapers from October 1978. Hours passed. Article after article, nothing. Then, near the bottom of one reel, I found another story about the Harper farmhouse. This one wasn't about the fire, it was about the weather. A powerful thunderstorm had rolled through the county that same night. Lightning, heavy rain, strong winds. Several homes had lost power. I almost skipped over it. Then one sentence caught my eye. It read, "Emergency calls reporting the farmhouse fire were first received at approximately 3:34 a.m. I stared at the article. 3:34. Not when the fire started. Not when firefighters arrived. The moment someone first called for help. I photocopied the article and drove straight to the shop before my shift. Emma was already waiting. I handed her the newspaper. She read that single sentence 3 times, then looked up at me. So every night, he comes back at the exact moment someone realized something was terribly wrong. Neither of us said another word. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed something I'd somehow overlooked every single night. Mounted above the entrance was an old brass bell. Not the electronic chime, a real bell. Weathered, darkened with age. I pointed toward it. That wasn't installed when the shop opened. Emma stepped closer. A small engraved plaque had been attached to its wooden mount. The lettering was faded, but still readable. Original Harper Farm entry bell. My stomach tightened. Someone hadn't bought a new bell when the vape shop opened. They'd kept the old one. The same bell that had once hung outside the front door of the Harper farmhouse. And every morning at exactly 3:34 a.m., it rang. The next morning, Emma asked if I wanted to meet her at the county courthouse. There has to be a death certificate, she said. If he really disappeared, someone had to file something. By noon, we were sitting in the county archives. The clerk disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a thin manila folder. She placed it on the table between us. Across the front, typed in faded black ink, was a single name, James Harrison Harper. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside were only a handful of documents, a property tax record, a copy of his driver's license, an insurance claim. And finally, a death certificate. Emma slowly turned it toward me. I read it twice, then a third time. Date of death, October 14th, 1978. Cause of death, smoke inhalation. Location, Harper residence. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Emma broke the silence. My mom never told me this. I looked back at the file. Everything appeared official, signed, stamped, filed. According to the county, James Harper had died nearly 50 years ago. The mystery should have ended right there. Except, it didn't. Because tucked inside the back of the folder was one final page. Not a government document, a handwritten note. The ink had faded badly. Most of it was impossible to read. Only one sentence remained completely clear. Body positively identified by personal effects. Emma frowned. Personal effects. The lighter, I whispered. She looked down at the brass Zippo sitting on the table, still resting exactly where we'd placed it earlier that morning. A long silence filled the room. Then Emma quietly said something that made my stomach tighten. If Grandpa died with this lighter, she looked at me. Who left it behind at your store? Neither of us had an answer. The courthouse clock struck one. The sound echoed through the nearly empty archives. For the first time since this whole thing began, I wasn't wondering whether James Harper had died. The paperwork was clear. He had. The question that kept circling in my mind was much simpler. If the county identified his body using that lighter, then why was the lighter sitting on the table between us? For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about James Harper. Every night at exactly 3:34 a.m., he walked through the front doors, bought the same disposable vape, paid with exact cash, nodded politely, then disappeared into the darkness. Nothing changed. Except, this time, Emma was there. She stood quietly near the drink cooler, watching, waiting. James entered exactly as he always had. His eyes drifted around the shop, not aimlessly, deliberately, almost as though he was looking for something, or remembering where things used to be. When he reached the counter, I did something I'd never done before. I slid the brass lighter across the countertop. I think you forgot this. For the first time since I'd met him, James didn't reach for the vape. He looked down at the lighter, then slowly lifted his eyes toward me. There was no surprise on his face, no confusion, only recognition. He placed one weathered hand gently on top of the lighter, but instead of taking it, he slowly pushed it back toward me, almost as if he were refusing it. Then he pointed toward the front windows, not at the parking lot, not at the gas station, toward a single massive oak tree standing near the edge of the property, the only thing left from the old Harper farm. Neither Emma nor I spoke. James gave one final nod, picked up the disposable vape, paid with exact cash, then walked out into the darkness. Emma and I rushed outside. The parking lot was empty. No footsteps, no cars, no sign that anyone had been there. Only the old oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the warm night air. We looked at each other. Without saying a word, we crossed the parking lot. The tree was enormous. Its trunk was so wide it would have taken 3 adults holding hands to wrap around it. Emma brushed her fingers across the bark. My mom always said Grandpa planted this when she was born. My flashlight swept across the base of the tree. That's when I noticed it. Half hidden beneath years of leaves and dirt was a flat piece of limestone, almost like a marker. We knelt down together and cleared away the debris. As more of the stone appeared, so did faded lettering. Not a gravestone, not a memorial, just 4 simple words: Harper Family Home. I looked back toward the vape shop, then toward the gas station. For the first time, I understood. James hadn't been returning for the vape. He hadn't been returning for the lighter. He'd been returning because this was still home. And every morning at exactly 3:34 a.m., he walked through the front door the only way he still knew how. People ask me why I eventually quit working the overnight shift. They usually assume it was because of the hours or the pay. Sometimes they joke that a vape shop at 3 in the morning must attract some strange people. They're right, it does, but not for the reasons they think. Emma and I never told anyone about James Harper. Who would have believed us? Instead, we quietly gave the old photographs and family records back to her mother. The brass lighter stayed locked inside my desk drawer. Neither of us ever spoke about throwing it away. Some things you just don't. Life eventually moved on. Lucky Spot closed. A new gas station opened across town. Third Eye Vape changed owners. The walls were repainted. The shelves were rearranged. New employees came and went. To anyone walking through those front doors, it was just another convenience store. Ordinary, forgettable. Months later, I stopped by to buy a drink while driving through town. The overnight employee didn't recognize me. We talked for a few minutes. As I turned to leave, I asked him one question. Busy nights? He laughed. Not really. Same guy comes in every morning. I felt my stomach tighten. Oh yeah. He nodded. Older gentleman, gray jacket, always at exactly. He glanced toward the clock. 3:34. I didn't say another word. I simply thanked him and walked outside. The parking lot was quiet. The old oak tree still stood near the edge of the property. Its branches moved gently in the wind. I looked toward the front doors one last time. The brass bell above the entrance rang softly as another customer walked inside. For just a moment, I thought I saw an older man standing near the counter. Tall, thin, gray jacket, patiently waiting. Then someone else walked between us, and he was gone. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I didn't. I honestly don't know anymore. What I do know is that some places remember the people who once called them home, even after the buildings disappear, even after the roads change, even after everyone who knew them is gone. Sometimes at exactly 3:34 a.m., the past still finds its way back through the front door. If this story left you wondering about the secrets places hold, consider sharing it with someone who enjoys a good mystery.